Hello again. In the last segment, we were talking about working conditions and wages for jobs that Barbara Ehrenreich is working in that book. Now what I want to talk about is life at home for working class America. I use the term home very, very loosely. One of the things that I feel really is important when it comes to an observation that Ehrenreich makes is that it's not cheap to be poor. It's expensive to be poor, and that might not sound like something that makes a lot of sense. It is kind of confusing when you think about it. But ask yourself where people like Ehrenreich are working, what they are eating, if they're eating anything at all, and the places in which well, not the places, but maybe some of the things that they have to buy for work. I mean, uniforms are part of the expense of working at a place like Hearthside. Again, we need to go back into the earlier part of the 20th century to understand that there is not only an improvement in working class life in America, but also changes that are being headed up by the federal government. I want you to go to page 12 of your nickel and dime book, and toward the bottom of that page there's this paragraph that starts out, "So I decide to make the common trade-off." Find that paragraph. So I decide to make the common trade-off between affordability and convenience and go for a $500 a month efficiency 30 miles up a two-lane highway from the employment opportunities of Key West, meaning 45 minutes if there's no road construction and I don't get caught behind some Sunday's Canadian tourists. I hate the drive along a roadside studded with white crosses commemorating the more effective head-on collisions, but it's a sweet little place, a cabin more or less set in the swampy backyard of a converted mobile home where my landlord, an affable TV repairman, lives with his bartender girlfriend. Anthropologically speaking, the trailer park would be preferable, but here I have a gleaming white floor and a firm mattress, and the few resident bugs are easily vanquished. Can we agree that this is not exactly home sweet home? This is not exactly a place that any one of us, I'd like to think, would like to call home? It's about affordability. Now you ask yourself, why is she choosing to live in a bug-infested, glorified trailer park or trailer home? And it has everything to do with affordability. I mean, she cannot afford anything even above and beyond that. I mean, that's kind of stretching it. I think if you read a little bit further, you can see that she actually has to take on another job at I believe it was a gas station called Jerry's, just to make ends meet. Now, take that and juxtapose it to some of the things that are being discussed in the earlier part of the 20th century. Okay? And again, take us back to the New Deal era with Franklin Roosevelt. We know that I've made quite a big deal about the proposed second Bill of Rights that Franklin Roosevelt is talking about in his New Deal. I've linked the video in some form or fashion of Franklin Roosevelt discussing this second Bill of Rights. But even if you can't find it in eCampus, you can easily go onto YouTube and just search FDR Second Bill of Rights, and it should be the first thing that pops up. Anyway, watch that. And ask yourself, what is it that Franklin Roosevelt wants to make your right? Not your privilege, but your right. One of the things that he points out is all Americans should have a right to a decent home. Now, what he does to that end is he does his best to make that a reality through something called the GI Bill of Rights. The bottom line was that the second Bill of Rights was too radical for Congress, even in the midst of the New Deal era, and therefore there was no way he was ever going to get that passed. So what he did was he came up with the next best thing, which was a series of hoops that Americans would need to jump through. In other words, if you served in the military, and it didn't matter if it was wartime or peacetime, you would be entitled to certain things, including a college education, but more importantly for our purposes right now, you would qualify for a low-interest government loan through the Veterans Administration. And as I pointed out in this class before, these returning GIs from Europe or Asia in the aftermath of World War II, some of them are paying as little as $1 for a down payment on a brand new home. I mean, brand new, built this year, brand new. So you take that and you compare it with the situation that has been dealt to Barbara Ehrenreich. Now, I know she's a civilian, and therefore she would not qualify for things like veterans loans in the first place. But I mean, ask yourself what is being done to put people in homes. What's being done during this period? And the answer is not very much. Why not very much? Well, let's take a look at the situation. There's really two examples that I think would be helpful when it comes to analyzing this. The first is what happens seemingly every time the government proposes building public housing. For instance, in the middle of World War II, the government needed to find a place to put all of these war workers that were coming from the Southwest and the South, and so therefore what they had proposed was building public housing projects. Now, you and I have a very different understanding about the word projects as it relates to houses or housing. But back during the New Deal era, this was very well intended in the sense that it was going to be low-cost housing. Now, every time that the government tried to build these projects, there was a really big hub-to-bub, and in some instances even violence. I mean, certainly that was the case in places like Detroit. But there was some significant violence and a definite pushback against the idea of the government taking the lead when it comes to building these low-cost housing homes. But I think there's an even more relevant issue that we need to keep in mind when it comes to affordable housing. On his last day of office, Dwight Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, warned us against what he called the military-industrial complex. Now, what he meant was that there is a clear-cut danger as far as military spending. And when you spent a lot of money, an enormous amount of money, on weapons defense, missiles, aircraft carriers, tanks, things of that sort, you're ultimately giving those weapons contractors an enormous lot of power when it comes to politics and especially foreign policy. I think that's what Eisenhower was primarily concerned with, was that these weapon contractors would have so much power in American politics. But there's something else that you need to keep in mind. There's only so much money that comes into the federal government. I mean, it only has so much of ability to buy things, and afterwards it becomes more and more difficult. But when the government buys or pays a contractor to build a nuclear submarine or an aircraft carrier or whatnot, it can't afford to do things like invest in low-cost housing. It can't afford to do other things like lighten Barbara Ehrenreich's load with mass transit, public transit. You could call that a busing system or a subway system or things of that like. I think what you're going to find over the course of the 20th century is that begins to become less and less and less of a priority of the federal government. I mean, certainly by the time that the 1980s roll around with Ronald Reagan, the idea of public anything is almost a dirty word. So you've got the federal government backing away from making life in America more and more secure. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood about this. I'm not talking about handouts. I'm talking about government leading the way when it comes to making housing, which is very much bedrock of security, middle class security, a reality for millions and millions of working class Americans. Clearly, we see that that's not the case for Barbara Ehrenreich, and we can see that it plays a very significant role when it comes to her ability to do other things, let alone make ends meet when it comes to housing costs. Think about that, and think about something else that I'll refer to as the social safety net. What I'd like you to do right now is click on the next link which is going to talk to you about government programs that are designed to provide a social safety net in American life.